morning, everybody. I don't know what's going on with this. I don't know. It says something that it doesn't normally say. Stand by. We had some work done on the audio this week, so that might be the problem. What now?
Let me try the other one real quick.
He's going to try something else. All right. I'll just yell until we have that figured out. So we're looking at Psalm 75 to 77. We started this last week. We do this every fourth quarter of the year. Here's the schedule of what we're looking at. We're going to have a couple times where I'm out of town, and Elijah's going to be covering those classes, if I remember right. I'm going to get that into the schedule there. But we're looking at each of the Psalms, and over the course of 4 quarters, every fourth quarter over the course of 4 years, sounds like something's working. We'll have gone through all of the Psalms. And so, we're asking 4 questions to each of the Psalms that we look at. The first one is, what do you notice? The second one is, what do you wonder? The third one is, what are you reminded of? And then fourthly, what can you pray based off of this Psalm? And so we're going to keep doing the same thing. This time with 3 Psalms. These ones are a little bit shorter than last time. Okay, thank you. All right, there we go. All right, so remember that the book of Psalms is broken up into 5 different books. We looked at book 1 a couple years ago. We looked at book 2 last year. We're looking at books 3 and 4 together because they have the shortest number of Psalms in each of those. And then, Lord willing, next year, quarter 4, we'll be looking at book 5. Each of the 5 books have corresponding themes to the first 5 books of the Bible. So first book of Psalms has a lot of creation kind of imagery, written mainly by David. Book 2 has a lot of Exodus imagery that we looked at last year. The ones that we're looking at right now in books 3 and 4 correspond a lot with Leviticus and Numbers. And so Asaph, for example, is writing a lot of these, and he worked at the temple. So we're seeing a lot of those kinds of themes as we go through this. They'll become more prominent, especially as we go through this. But we're going to be looking at Psalm 75 to begin with, and like we normally do, let's first offer a summary and an outline of this before we read. A song of praise to the God of justice. Asaph reminds us that God alone exalts and brings low, and the wicked will drink the cup of his wrath. Human pride and power cannot endure, but God's people can rejoice, knowing his judgment is right, certain, and final. And the outline of this is the first verse just gives a praise to God. And then 2 through 5, God is declaring his judgment. This is one of the unique times in the Psalms where we actually have the direct words of God. And so it doesn't happen very often in the Psalms. And then 6 through 10, you've got this concept of God being a God who humbles the prideful and exalts the lowly, themes that we see in other places in the Bible. So what we're going to do is I will read this psalm, and then we will just ask those 4 questions. And like we do with these classes, you guys tell me what you're seeing, and then eventually I'll start sharing some of the things that I've seen as well. So look at Psalm 75. To the choir master, according to Do Not Destroy, a psalm of Asaph, a song. We give thanks to you, O God. We give thanks, for your name is near. We recount your wondrous deeds. At the set time that I appoint, I will judge with equity. When the earth totters and its inhabitants, it is I who keep steady its pillars. I say to the boastful, do not boast, and to the wicked, do not lift up your horn. Do not lift up your horn on high, or speak with haughty neck. For not from the east or from the west, and not from the wilderness comes lifting up. But it is God who executes judgment, putting down one and lifting up another. For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup with foaming wine well mixed, and he pours out from it, and all the wicked of the earth shall drain it down to the dregs. But I will declare it forever. I will sing praises to the God of Jacob. All the horns of the wicked I will cut off, but the horns of the righteous shall be lifted up. All right, let's start out with the first question. What do you guys notice in this?
God chooses the appointed time for his judgment.
He chooses appointed times for his judgment. Very good. There might be connections back to that. In Psalm, remember what the concerns were in Psalm 73 and 74 last week? How come the wicked people continue to flourish and thrive? In Psalm 74, God, it looks like you've not kept your promises. Almost like Psalm 75 is an answer to the previous two Psalms, that in God's timing, he will judge. So good. What else do you guys notice?
He has the ability to bring down one and exalt the other. The proud are brought down and the humble are exalted.
Yeah, this shifting of positions, the humbling and the exalting is a big theme, especially beginning around verse 6 here. Good. What else do you guys see? Yeah, if you look starting in verse 2, do you guys all have quotation marks? Like it's God speaking from 2 to 5. So if all of the direct words of God in the Bible were red letters, verses 2 through 5 would be red letters. By the way, here's a Bible trivia question. Anybody know which book of the Bible has the most direct speech from God? Close. It's Leviticus. Like almost every chapter begins with, thus declares the Lord. And so yeah, it's just interesting. All right, what else do you guys see here?
Verse 3 talks about how even if things seem like the world is falling apart, God is still there to take care of us.
Do we ever feel like the earth is tottering and everything's falling apart? Does anything ever happen in the news that make you go, what in the world's going on here? Things like that. In verse 3, you've got the sons of Asaph acknowledging that there. And one of the things that gets brought up here is this idea of the horns of the enemies. Horns are a symbol of strength. And if you've got, say, a bull that's got really intimidating horns, and they're cut off, or they're removed or something, you've taken the power away from that animal. So in verse 4, I say to the boastful, do not boast, and to the wicked, do not lift up your horn. Quit acting like you're powerful and that you got everything figured out. God has a way of taking people that do that and showing that they're actually nothing. We've already brought up verses 2 through 5, direct speech from God, which is not common in Psalms. And just, have you ever noticed the consistency of pride being condemned in the Bible? Somebody who has maybe never done the really big major sins that our culture talks about, or like Christians talk about, like I haven't done this or I haven't done that. You know what the Bible condemns maybe more than anything else is pride? Do you think that somebody who's gone to church all their life could become prideful? Do you realize that just because maybe you haven't done those other things, that you stand under judgment just as much as anybody else? So God consistently throughout Scripture is condemning pride, and this is just another example of that, of what we see there. Okay, let's go to this next question. What questions do you have about this psalm? I already brought up this one earlier, but is Psalm 75 answering the concerns of Psalm 73 and 74? Yeah.
Well, the horns of the wicked are going to be cut off, but the horns of the righteous will be lifted up. So are the horns representing pride and strength? And how does that play into the humble?
Yeah, so if the humble are going to, in verse 10, all the horns of the wicked I will cut off, but the horns of the righteous shall be lifted up. Horns just represent strength. You can be prideful with the strength you think you have, like the people do in verse 4, or you can have God lift up your strength and show that you actually could defeat your enemies, but it was by God's strength and power that he made that happen. So horns by themselves are not a bad thing. So yeah. In verse 1, what does it mean for God's name to be near? In verse 1, it says, "We give thanks to you, O God. We give thanks, for your name is near. We recount your wondrous deeds." No, oftentimes in Scripture, it's God is near, but what does it mean for God's name to be near? Do you guys have any thoughts on that, since this is my question? It's more personal? What else?
The idolatrous gods have many names, but there's only one name for Jehovah God.
Yeah, and if we say that, if we say God is Jehovah Jireh, isn't that the God who provides in Genesis 2:22? I mean, is that what the Hebrew? I don't remember the names of God. There's so many names of God, but the name of somebody represents their character and who they are, and so everything that God is near. It's just another way of saying the same thing. I think is the point there. But maybe in verse 4 we could ask this: in what ways do we lift up our horns in arrogance today? Are there ways in which we try to flex our strength and our wisdom and our accomplishments so that other people can try to be impressed with us? And God could look at that and go, what is that? I'm just going to remove that, or I'm going to destroy that. I think something like this, especially when we're seeing direct words from God in this passage, if we are prideful people, we've made ourselves an enemy of God. Any other things about those first two questions? Okay. Let's ask this question then. What are you reminded of? Does this sound like any other scriptures? Anything that this reminds you of? Yeah, good. The cup of God's wrath is something that's brought up a couple other places in the scripture. I have that actually listed here in a couple things. Anything else?
You talk about his name being near. I don't. This is not necessarily answering your question, but I think about here today how many times we hear people say, "Oh my God," or blaspheming God, and they're not realizing that God is right there hearing this.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Good. We've already talked about God humbling and exalting. You guys know that 1st and 2nd Samuel were originally one book, and they had to cut it in half because the scrolls could only be like 32 feet or something. And so if something went beyond that, they had to cut it in half. And then, so 1st and 2nd. So if you were to ask, okay, what's the theme of 1 Samuel? You're also answering the question, what's the theme of 2 Samuel? Because they're one book. So at the beginning of 1 Samuel, at the beginning of 2 Samuel, and at the end of 2 Samuel, there's a poem where this theme of God humbling and exalting is shown. So 3 times in pretty long poems in the book of 1 and 2 Samuel, we're reminded of that. But every single story in 1 and 2 Samuel fits the theme of God humbling and exalting. So for example, with Saul and David, who was the prideful one? Saul. Who was the humble one? And is there a humbling and exalting going on? What about the story of David and Goliath? Who is the prideful one? Goliath. Who's the humble one? David. Is there a changing of humbling and exalting going on? Even later on when David himself becomes prideful, he ends up getting brought down. And so these themes that Asaph is recording, these things it is the theme of 1 and 2 Samuel. So we have that going on there. Matt already brought up the cup of wrath in verse 8 that Isaiah in Revelation also brings up, the way that God is going to judge his enemies there. And then just the idea that Proverbs 16:18 brings up about pride before the fall. If you're prideful, you will be humbled. It's going to happen. It's just part of the law of how God created the world. Thoughts or comments? Anything else you guys are reminded of? All right, what prayers do you look at this psalm and say, I should start incorporating that into my life more? Yeah, help me to avoid pride. Good. What else? Yeah, giving thanks, like the verse 1 begins. Even when everything in this world seems like it's just falling apart, this psalm begins with them giving thanks. Carrie?
Verse 9, but I will declare it forever.
Yes, good, good. Do you guys notice in verse 6? This is an interesting verse. For not from the east or from the west, and not from the wilderness comes lifting up, but it is God who executes judgment. What does it mean? It's not from the east or from the west, and from the wilderness comes lifting up. What does this lifting up mean? Lifting up here is a good thing. What does it mean to be lifted up? Being rescued. You've got these enemies with these powerful horns. Don't look to the east. Don't look to the west. Don't look even to the wilderness. It's going to come from God. And so help me to look to you for lifting. What do we look for in our life to lift us up? What's to the west and what's to the east and what's in the... We scramble and look all over the place for things to lift us up. It's God that will do that. And so help us to do the same thing. I like that imagery in verses 6 and 7. And so, yeah, we already had that one as well. Okay, anything else about Psalm 75? There's a little bit of a shorter psalm. The next one is as well.
I was just going to say, verse 3 is a great reminder that God is in control when the earth is falling apart and everything seems to be in such chaos. He says, I set up its pillars firmly, which means that I control everything.
Yes.
I can control the narrative. I'm in control of the chaos that is happening. I'm in control of the good and the bad.
Yes.
I created the earth, and I set up its pillars firmly, and I hold everything up its strength.
And we're going to see in the very next psalm that God can use man's wickedness for his good. And so we'll see that in the next one. Good. All right, let's go to the next one. So Psalm 76, summary of this psalm, celebrating God's power in defending his people. Centered in Zion, or Jerusalem, he breaks the weapons of war and causes the proud to tremble. Even human wrath is turned to his praise, and the nations are called to honor him. The psalm portrays God as both terrifying in judgment and glorious in salvation. And so you see how this seems to be a progression from Psalm 73 and 74. The wicked prosper, our nation is falling apart, but God is who he says he is. This is the strength that we just looked at in the previous psalm. And now it seems like God has done something about this. So in verses 1 through 6, God is to be praised. 7 through 12, God is to be feared. So let's go ahead and read Psalm 76. To the choir master with stringed instruments, a psalm of Asaph, a song. In Judah, God is known. His name is great in Israel. His abode has been established in Salem, his dwelling place in Zion. There he broke the flashing arrows, the shield, the sword, and the weapons of war. Glorious are you, more majestic than the mountains full of prey. The stout-hearted were stripped of their spoil. They sank into sleep. All the men of war were unable to use their hands. At your rebuke, O God of Jacob, both rider and horse lay stunned. But you are to be feared. Who can stand before you when once your anger is roused? From the heavens you uttered judgment. The earth feared and was still. When God arose to establish judgment, to save all the humble of the earth. Surely the wrath of man shall praise you. The remnant of wrath you will put on like a belt. Make your vows to the Lord your God and perform them. Let all around him bring gifts to him who is to be feared, who cuts off the spirits of princes, who is to be feared by the kings of the earth. Okay. So, what do you notice here? What was that? Yeah, so if the previous Psalms made it seem like Israel and Jerusalem was just falling apart, God has a way of defending his people and being there for his people. And so that's also a big theme throughout the scripture. What else do you guys see? Yeah.
It seems like geography here in the first verse. He's known in Judah. He's known, his name is great in Israel and Salem. He's also in Zion. I don't know on the map, but before it's like he's, hey, in the north and the south and the east, there's going to be all this wicked. And I wonder if it's kind of replacing that with saying, hey, you're not going to find God there, but he is in all these places.
So this is actually 3 terms for the same place, which doesn't happen often. So Salem, anybody know who was a king of Salem in the Old Testament? Melchizedek was. And so you've got Judah, Salem, Zion. Anybody know the other names for Jerusalem? Jerusalem's not listed here, but what other names for Jerusalem are there in the Bible? City of David. And I think there might be another one, but yeah. So you got all these names for God's dwelling place. In Psalm 74, it says in verse 7, they set your sanctuary on fire. They profaned the dwelling place of your name, bringing it down to the ground. And now in Psalm 76, a few psalms later, you've got God dwelling in this place that was destroyed. So that's why I say I think there's a progression going on here. What else do you guys notice here? Yeah.
I think it's interesting that there's 6 verses of where God is being praised, and then 6 where he's feared. So it's like you could take one where he's praised, but then right after he's going to be feared. So they get that reassurance that there will be justice.
There's going to be justice here. And if you're for God, verses 1 through 6 is comforting. And if you're against God, 7 through 12 is not comforting to you. Some of the descriptions of God, the power of God's word, look at verse 6. At your rebuke, O God of Jacob, both rider and horse lay stunned. Just God's rebuke can defeat all the horses of the enemies. Look at verse 8. From the heavens you uttered judgment. The earth feared and was stilled. Look, it's just God rebuking and uttering judgment. His words change everything. And so I think that it's a cool thing to see that. In verse 10, human wrath ends up serving God's purposes. So if you're the Israelites and you guys have been judged and destroyed, here this verse comes along and says, have you ever had people be really wicked and evil towards you? God has a way of even taking that and using it for his purposes. So even when you think you're trying to defeat God, you're not. All right, anything else you guys notice here? All right, what do you wonder? Any questions you have about this one? Yeah.
Surely the wrath of man shall praise you, the remnant of wrath. You will put on like a belt. I really wasn't sure what that meant.
Yeah, so when you put a belt on in the morning, I'm taking this and I'm using it for myself. And so I think the imagery in verse 10 is, surely the wrath of man shall praise you, the remnant of wrath you will put on like a belt. The remnant that have been left over from God's wrath, he's going to use them. He's going to use them for his purposes. It's just a poetic way, I think, of saying that. This makes me wonder, though, was there an actual battle that Asaph was writing about? We're not given much about the historical context. In the flow of thought with the Psalms, there's been things happening at the temple, which this is book 3 of the Psalms, and which book had a lot to say about the dwelling place of God. Leviticus did. So that's why it kind of fits that. But how does the wrath of man end up being used for God's purposes? Or I should have worded that. Yeah, no, I did word that fine. Okay, so how does that happen today? Where the evil or the wrath of man ends up being used for God's purposes? Can you think of any other times in the Bible where that happens? Yeah, he used foreign nations to punish the Israelites, and then he also used foreign nations to bring them back. But the Israelites' wickedness ended up being used to show God's holiness to the world. Good, what else? Yeah, in the book of Acts, persecution starts happening. The wrath of man ends up being used to cause the gospel to spread, from Acts 8 through 12 especially. We see it going all over the place because of persecution. What else? What about the crucifixion of Christ? You've got the wrath of man, and God is using it for his purposes. So this happens all throughout the scriptures. And so how Asaph means this right here, I'm not totally sure. Maybe he's grabbing onto this truth about God to give him hope in the midst of a dark time. But let's ask this question then. What are you reminded of? I've already brought up Salem. Reminds us of Melchizedek. Salem means peace. God is the one that dwells in the city of peace, but they don't feel like they have much peace right now. Your circumstances can be terrible, but you can still have peace in God. And it just reminds you of other great victories in the Bible that God always does for his people. Anything you guys are reminded of here? Yeah.
I'm reminded of the emotions class on Wednesday when
Yes, the jealousy of God to come in and protect his people, even when they've sinned against him. We see that theme there. Good. All right, what prayers can we make from this?
Let me have confidence in your power to direct the affairs of the world, for you will do your will.
Yeah, help us to have confidence in God's power to direct the affairs of the world. Like if God is the one that's ultimately in control and he can even use evil for his purposes, it's not that we don't grieve over the evil that we see, but we should have a degree of confidence that the non-Christian would never have. Yeah, Gage? Yes. Yeah, knowing that God is the one that's going to repay evil and he's the one that's going to judge actually alleviates us of needing to be the ones that bring judgment and justice. And so if we know that about God, then that frees us up to pray for those who persecute us and hope that they can change and repent. Yeah, Noah?
Along with that, which is praying, I feel like it's encompassed in let your will be done. We can only control what we can control, and do the best we can do, obviously, but at the end of the day, be okay and trust God and what he's going to do.
Yes. Yep, good. Help us to trust you more when we see things happening that don't make sense to us. Good. All right, yeah, reverent fear. The imagery in this psalm of God breaking the weapons of the enemies, I like that imagery. And so we can incorporate that. Thank you for breaking the weapons of sin, Satan, and death. All right, anything else about this one? Okay, let's look at Psalm 77. This is the longer one of the three that we're looking at today, but even at that, it's not very short. In fact, if you look at the next psalm, Psalm 78, do you guys see how long Psalm 78 is? It's probably longer than all the psalms that we are looking at just today. And if it's not longer, it's about the same length. So next Sunday, the plan is to just look at Psalm 78 because it's the second longest psalm. Anybody know what the first longest psalm is? 119. This is the second longest one, and we're just going to look at that next week. But for now, let's look at Psalm 77, and here's the summary of it. It begins in anguish with the psalmist crying out and questioning whether God has abandoned him. Doesn't this sound like a shift from the last two psalms now? Asaph chooses to remember God's mighty deeds, especially the redemption at the Red Sea. Though God's ways are mysterious and unseen, his past faithfulness becomes the anchor for present hope. And so, very similar to other psalms that we've looked at in previous years, but verses 1 through 4 shows the distress and the sleeplessness that Asaph has. Have you ever been sleepless at night because you were worried about stuff? Questioning God's faithfulness in verses 5 through 9, and then he's choosing to remember God's deeds. It's always a choice. And so he's going to, remember like what we talked about in the emotions class on Wednesday, that our problem oftentimes is that we are listening to our self-talk rather than talking to ourselves. It's a decision to think about the things that we ought to think about. And if we don't make that decision, what will naturally come into our hearts are all the things that we're worried about and we need to freak out about. And so the psalmist here is going to demonstrate this truth for us in a really helpful way. Look starting in verse 1 here, or the title first. To the choir master, according to Jeduthun, a psalm of Asaph. I cry aloud to God, and he will hear me. In the day of my trouble, I seek the Lord. In the night, my hand is stretched out without wearying. My soul refuses to be comforted. When I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, notice that word, my spirit faints. You hold my eyelids open. I am so troubled that I cannot speak. I consider the days of old, the years long ago. I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. Then my spirit made a diligent search. Will the Lord spurn forever and never again be favorable? Has his steadfast love forever ceased? Are his promises at an end for all time? Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Then I said, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your wonders of old. I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. Your way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? You are God who works wonders. You have made known your might among the peoples. You with your right arm redeemed your people, the children of Jacob and Joseph. When the waters saw you, O God, when the waters saw you, they were afraid. Indeed, the deep trembled. The clouds poured out water. The skies gave forth thunder. Your arrows flashed on every side. The crash of your thunder was in the whirlwind. Your lightnings lighted up the world. The earth trembled and shook. Your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters. Yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. This is a really wonderful, rich psalm here. What do y'all notice here? Yeah. Yeah, so his first response is going to be to seek the Lord. Verses 1 through 10, or 1 through 9, I guess, are showing sort of this turmoil that he's having at night. It's kind of, this psalm is sort of telling a story of him having this sleeplessness, trying to figure out how he's going to approach God. But he does know that God will hear him, even though there's a lot of things not going well. He starts with this: if I do pray to God, I know that he's going to hear. And so he starts wrestling, and I like how the word meditation is brought up so much. In verse 3, when I remember God, I moan. When I meditate, my spirit faints. In verse 6, I said, let me remember my song in the night. Let me meditate in my heart. And then in verse 12, I will ponder all your work and meditate on your mighty deeds. In our culture, what does it mean to meditate? Like if you take yoga. To focus on nothing, to empty your mind. In the Bible, what does it mean to meditate? Especially in verse 12. You're going to be filling your mind with God's things. So the worldly meditation says clear your mind. The biblical meditation says fill it with who God is. And this is what he's consciously doing in this psalm. And all right, so I think those things are interesting to notice. Anything else you guys think are interesting to notice?
He breaks the enemy's arrows, but he has no, I think we use his own. It says in verse 17, the clouds poured out water, God sent out a sound, and your arrows also flashed out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, like a contrast to like Psalm 76, verse 3. There he broke the flashing arrows, the shield, the sword, and the weapons of war. And then in the next psalm, God is going to use his weapons against the people. Yeah, good. I like that. I'm not exactly sure. I think I know what to make of this verse, but it's so interesting. In verse 19, your way was through the sea, your path through the great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. Anybody have a different translation there? Were not known. Your footprints were not known, not seen. What does that mean? Yeah, I think it's referencing Israel's deliverance from Egypt, but what would it mean that God's footprints were unseen? So yeah, that's the context of what was happening. Could anybody literally see God's footprints in anywhere they were going? Have you ever felt like you're kind of walking in the dark? You're trying to walk in the light as much as you can, but still you don't know what's happening next. There's not clear signs of what's going on and all of that. We're not promised things like that. And so this imagery of God guiding them and helping them, but you can't see his footprints, I just think is an interesting thing. All right. What do you wonder from this? I wonder again, what circumstance was Asaph facing? Because we're not told exactly. Maybe one of the reasons that we're not told exactly is because if we knew exactly, we might not think that a psalm like this would apply to us. But is there any way you can relate to this psalm without even knowing all the historical context? He's in turmoil. He's having sleepless nights. In some ways, I wonder if we should be glad that we don't have the exact historical moment of all of these psalms, because it makes it feel like we can relate to it more. And so, but then how can remembering the past sustain faith in the present trials? That's more of like, I think we know intellectually how the answer to that question. But what does it look like in our life personally? God is taking, if you multiply your age by 365, that's how many days you've been alive. And all those days, God has given you everything that you've needed. But you're worried about next week. Does that make sense? God has been really faithful. He's taken care of us. And so I really ask that question not for the intellectual answer, but what would it look like in every one of our life if we thought about how God is taking care of us and what that should mean for us next week? When does God feel absent to us today? Do you ever feel like it seems like God is just absent in your life? The writers of these Psalms feel really like they can open up about these things. Anything else that you wonder about this? Yeah.
In verse 4, it says, "You hold my eyelids open." Do you think that's meaning like he holds his eyelids open so that he can still like know the way he needs to walk, or so that he's not doesn't get too weary?
I wrestled with that verse, and I think what's going on, where it says, "You hold my eyelids open," and then the next line says, "I am so troubled that I cannot speak." I think he's saying, God, you're the one holding my eyelids open because of all the trials you're letting me face. Like, I can't sleep. And I think it's his raw emotion being declared to God. That's how I look at it, but it could also be like God is keeping him awake so that he can meditate. But either way, God is the one keeping him awake. Is it because of the trials, or is it because God is encouraging him to meditate on him? And I think you could read it either way. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I just wonder if right there when it starts off in verse 1 and 2, talking about crying out to God and calling aloud to God. I understand it's the Old Testament, and the Old Testament has a lot of specific examples that the people have to follow. Like actually when we were talking about instrumental music, like the exact things that had to be followed in order to be done for it to be correct.
Yes.
If that's kind of in our prayer life today, that we often struggle with anxiety or struggle with, does God hear my prayers? Because maybe I didn't say in Jesus' name, I didn't use Jesus' name correctly in my prayer. I didn't pray with extreme faith. Sometimes just our hearts are probably what matters more in the reasoning and our faith. And I think that's the example that we're given.
Yeah.
The New Testament is sometimes just when you talk to God. It may not be perfect, but understand He still hears regardless.
Yes.
And I'm not saying we have examples to pray, we have models to pray, and we need to follow certain things. I'm not just saying we can just blatantly approach God in any vain way or weak way, but
He wants us to talk to him, though. Yes.
it doesn't have to be perfect to a T.
I knew somebody that struggled with scrupulosity, which is basically OCD. I've known several people that have fallen into this. It's OCD applied to their spiritual life. And he couldn't finish, if he was just in his own personal prayer life, it would take him 15 minutes just to finish a prayer. Like he would say, in Jesus' name, sorry God, as I was saying that, I thought something that wasn't really totally focused on you. So now I'm going to try to finish my prayer. Please forgive me for how I wasn't focused on you. All right, in Jesus, okay, God, I just had a lustful thought. And so literally, I'm not even exaggerating that. It would take him 15 minutes before he felt like he could put a bow tie on his prayer. Look at the picture here. Now, if you're set against God and you're living a wicked life, your prayer's not going any higher than the ceiling. There's other passages that show us that. But if you're seeking to walk in the light, we have a generous Father that wants us to talk to him. And so we have, I think, examples of this even in these Psalms, where I think we might be uncomfortable saying some of the things that these psalmists say, but they've been recorded for us, and we're looking at them right now. And so let's go on to what are we reminded of. I'm reminded of Psalm 73 that began this subsection of these Psalms of Asaph, where he was wrestling with envy for those who are prospering, even though that they're wicked. And then his perspective changes when he thinks about God's things. Same thing happens in this psalm. He's wrestling with everything that's going on. And then around verse 10, when he starts telling himself what to think about, his perspective changes. And this is where, like we talked about in the emotions class, I bring these two psalms up a lot. Psalm 42 and 43, do you guys remember what's repeated 3 times throughout those psalms? The sons of Korah are suffering as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs, all that. And then he says 3 times that he says to himself, hope in God. I have all these bad things going on in my life, but I'm going to tell myself what to think. Rather than just listening to myself and listening to all my worries, I will tell myself what to think about. And Psalm 77 is a really powerful example of the same principle that we see in Psalm 42 and 43. I love how he like, look at verse 9. Look at the shift from verses 9 and 10. Has God forgotten to be gracious? Has he in anger shut up his compassion? Have you ever felt that way before? God, what are you doing? Why are these things going on in my life? Look at, okay, well, how does he handle it? Does he go get drunk and dull his senses because he doesn't know how to deal with it? Or look at verse 10. Then I said, I will appeal to this, to the years of the right hand of the Most High. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. There's 2 paths you can go down. God, I don't know what you're doing. Things seem really messed up. I will remember you. That's how I'm going to handle this. A lot of other people would say, I don't know what's going on, I'm done with God. I don't know what's going on, I'm going to go get drunk. I don't know what's going on, I'm going to go scroll on my phone and not think about anything deep because this is all really difficult. He says, I don't know what's going on, but God, I will choose to remember who you are. Every one of us has that choice. And so it's a very powerful example of that same thing. Just even other people in the Bible that suffered in the way that they cried out to God, Job, Jeremiah, Paul's example in 2 Corinthians. Psalm 77 is just, it's so rich for all these things that we're talking about, especially with the emotions class as well. Anything else you guys want to say about that?
This reminds me of, I know we're not there yet, but Psalm 88.
Yeah.
Sons of Korah, I mean, the absolute cry for help is, I mean, when you read that, you take a step back and think about it. And it reminds me of these other songs that we're talking about. Just, which that was more focused on just the cry for help.
Yes. Yeah, good. Psalm 88 is a very dark, probably the darkest psalm. And you see a lot of people just willing to just share with God how they feel. Scott and then Joey. Yes. Yes. No matter how bad things are, we have the choice what we're going to think about. Joey? Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good imagery. That makes a lot of sense with what verse 4 is saying too. Good. Good. Anything else? See how rich, like, how many of us before this class could say, oh yeah, Psalm 77 is about this and I just love that psalm. Like, this is why we got to study all of these. It's so rich. And so thanks for the good discussion. Next week is just Psalm 78, and I think I put the material out there.